Kia ora koutou, ko Andy Hicks, tōku ingoa. I'm a freshwater ecologist at Hawke's Bay Regional Council. Today I wanted to talk to you about the proposed weir on the Rahui channel at Whakakī. There seems to be a lot of confusion around what the weir would look like and how it would function and what kind of effects it might have on the ecology of the system. So I thought it would be worthwhile recording this presentation so that people can try and get a few more facts. So I'll just share the screen. So yeah, I'm going to give a presentation, the same presentation that I gave to the Whakakī Lake Trust back in June. I'll go through some background information, just what type of lake Whakakī is. We'll go through the details why weir was proposed. We'll go through some of the specific concerns that have been raised as we've gone through the consultation process. And hopefully by the end, people will understand why we think the weir is a very good thing for Whakakī, both from the community perspective, also from the environmental perspective, and that the advantages strongly outweigh the disadvantages. But yeah, firstly, so Whakakī, it's an example of what scientists would refer to as an intermittently closed and open lake and lagoon, which is a bit of a mouthful. But what that means is it's this type of system where you've got a coastline where a lot of energy is pushing gravel against the coast. So the water running off the catchment can't maintain a channel going out to sea. The flow gets blocked by the gravel that the waves are pushing in. And so you end up with a lake and often an associated wetland complex that can be quite impressive. And so that's what Whakakī is. In terms of how the lake and the channel interact, so if you imagine putting a cross section through this lake, so kind of like putting a slice through it and looking at it from the side, and this diagram's the way that I'm going to try to explain how the weir will function. But the main body of the lake you can imagine is sort of a deeper basin. In the case of Whakakī, there's a shallower point between the lake and the channel, which we refer to as a sill, and that's quite important, which will become apparent later. And then you've got the Rahui channel, so the connection between the lake and where the lake gets opened down at Parker, which is deeper than the sill. It's often deeper than the lake itself actually as well. And then at the end, so between the waterway and the ocean, you've got this plug of gravel, which is this part of the beachhead here. So that blocks the water from being able to run out to sea. And just a note that these diagrams are really distorted. So the vertical scale, the height here is a lot more dramatic than it really is in real life. We do that so you can see the details of the weir, because the depth here might be 2 meters and the distance between the sill and the ocean is about 3 kilometers. So if we drew it to scale, it would just look like a flat line. You wouldn't be able to see the weir or the different heights that we're proposing for the weir to sit at. So that's why these diagrams are drawn with a distorted scale, and that might be why it's been hard or easy to get confused about how the weir will look and operate. It won't be anywhere near as extreme as what these diagrams may have led people to believe it was. So during an opening event, what happens is a digger will go down and remove the plug that is stopping the water from being able to flow out to sea. And when that happens, it means that the lake, which is the water level in the lake is higher than the sea level, that water can flow out to sea along the Rahui channel. When the digger makes its cut, it's a pretty small channel to begin with, and they time that so it gets opened on the outgoing tide, so the water can start to flow. And as it does so, it cuts a deeper channel, and then as it gets a little bit deeper, it'll get faster and it'll make the channel bigger and bigger and bigger. And it's only when that channel has enlarged itself quite a ways before it will start to drain the lake properly, in terms of the flow being high enough to detect a change in the water level in the lake. And once it gets going, it really goes. And that's an issue for our ability to stop the water flowing out at a point that we would like at the moment, because you can't plug a hole with 30 cubic metres per second of water flowing through it. It really is a raging torrent at that point. And the issue with that is, so if you're in spring and summer and the lake level's gotten too high, it's starting to flood, and you need to open it to protect assets and whatnot, then the water keeps on flowing out until the lake drops to a low level. We can't really go out there and stop it at a nice, healthy, high level. And in spring and summer, if we're not getting much rain, then the evaporation and seepage which is happening in the lake, that is more than the amount of water coming in off the catchment, and so the lake level starts to drop. And in spring and summer, the situation, which is very bad for the ecology, is when the lake level drops really low, the wetlands start to dry out, and you're really just left with a puddle of water that becomes a very concentrated algal soup. And the water chemistry starts to change, becomes more extreme and more toxic. There's obviously not as much space for fish and things like tuna to live in. And it's just not a nice place for them to live in full stop. So that's the kind of situation that we want to avoid from an ecological perspective. But obviously the lake does need to get opened at some point to stop the flooding that causes damage. So there's reasons why we want to open it, and these spring floods are a particular problem because the high water tables threaten the infrastructure, particularly at the Iwatia end, but also other areas of Whakakī. And even the road starts to get compromised if you let the lake fill up too much. So there's always going to be a point at which you need to open the lake. And if that's in spring and summer, it means that you're confronted with the problem of either tolerating the flooding or opening the lake up and it being a high risk situation for the lake going into that summer period. We get complaints around the septic tanks not functioning when those water levels get too high, and it's obvious to see when you drive past that the low-lying areas being used by farmers are getting flooded, and that's a real disruption during spring when it's sort of a key period of time for growing grass and crops. And then the ecological reasons that I touched on before, but they're quite dangerous for the lake. So if you remove that water, that sort of buffer for the summer period, that's not ideal. But the floodwaters also extract nutrients and feces from the soil on those farmed areas, which can help feed algal blooms. And if we're going about planting trees and whatnot around the lake edge, if the lake level rises and starts to flood those recent plantings, then that can kill them, and that's not a good situation either. So maintaining an agreed water level regime and being able to have a little bit more control over that water level, particularly in spring and summer, is quite essential to the broader community goals and those restoration efforts. So just in imagery, what we're confronted with at the moment is when the lake fills up and starts to look like this, where you've got flooding. If it's spring or summer, if you were to open the lake and you didn't get any rain to top it back up, then you're left with this sort of situation where the lake dries out, the fish start dying, or you stay in this situation where people are needing to put up with the problems that the flooding causes. So it's not a good decision, not a good choice to be making, and that's what we're currently facing. Well, that's what the community is currently facing. So why was a two-stage weir proposed? We did go through a number of options, and we thought the two-stage was the best, but some of the other options, one was do nothing. That's the situation we're in at the moment, and that's not a good situation. So there's a lot of tension, and it's a hard choice to make whether to open or not. Forced closures, we've tried them. They don't stop the lake at a high enough level. We still lose too much water. They're also expensive, $25,000 or $30,000 a pop, and they're dangerous. So that opening, getting people down there when the water's racing out is not something that's a very good thing to be doing. We looked at the idea of pumping or siphoning to the sea rather than needing to use an opening, and that was unfeasible because of the sheer volume of water that needs to get moved. The Rahui channel is 20 metres wide and about 2 metres deep for most of its length, And the flows that you get are up to 30 cubic metres per second, which is a lot of water for a pump or a siphon structure to mimic. And that's just not really feasible. And another thing that's been looked at by both ourselves and up that western end is the idea of using stop banks to confine the flooding and stop it from getting into the areas that people don't want those floodwaters to go. From an ecological perspective, that's not an ideal approach because it fragments that wetland habitat even further, and all of those wetland values start to get put at more risk, which is not good. And building a stop bank is one thing, but you also need a way of keeping the water level down on the other side of the stop bank, which has an associated pumping system. Water can move underground as well as when it rains up, on the other side of those stop banks. That rain needs to go somewhere, and so you need to be pumping that. That kind of system would be in the millions of dollars, so we didn't think that was feasible either. Two-stage weir came out as the best option. So this is what a two-stage weir would look like. So just going back to this kind of diagram where you're trying to look through a cross-section of the lake. This is the sill, that's the lake. And then the weir would go in between the lake and the current opening site on the Rahui channel. And there'd be two parts to the weir. The reason we call it a two-stage weir, there's a base, which is this lower part, and that's been designed so that it's the same height as that natural sill. The reason we need a base is because we need to be able to put these inserts on something to hold the water back, because there's a lot of energy that structure needs to resist during an opening event. So you need to have something solid there, and that's what the base is doing. But we've designed that base so it's the same height as the natural sill, which means there's essentially no difference between the current situation and having another structure in there that mimics what that natural sill is doing. And then you've got the weir inserts, which would bring the height of that structure up to 11.5. So these would be removable. When you don't want them there, you take them out. And that would be how we keep more water in the lake. So when you open the lake, the water flows out. Because you've got the weir with inserts in place, it would stop the water flowing out at around 11.5, rather than it dropping down to around 11 or even less sometimes, which is the current situation. And so just to reiterate that, the only function of the weir is to retain water in lake during a spring and summer opening event. It's not designed to keep the water level high all the time. It's only designed to stop the water flowing out during an opening event at a higher level than it currently does. So we're just trying to keep water in after an opening event. That's all the weir is doing. And so in winter, as I described before, you remove those inserts, you're left with this base because that's a serious structure. It needs to, not something you can easily take in and take out. So that would stay in place, and that would be the same height as the existing sill. And that means that we're not going to be impeding flushing. We're not going to be doing anything different to what is currently the case because we're just mimicking the height of that natural sill. So yeah, the lower weir level, that winter level would be the same as the status quo. So it won't stop the winter flushing benefits. And because we're removing those inserts, the Rahui channel will still be moving all of the water it's currently moving during a winter event. And so that means you won't be getting those silting problems that people might be worried about. And yeah, just to really reiterate this, I guess, so the higher stage is to hold the water back in the lake. That's all it's for, just to hold water back in the lake during an opening event. And when it's at the low stage, you get the same type of opening as exists now with the same flushing benefits. And because you're able to keep more water in the lake going into summer, it'll stop it looking like this. Because the water will go into summer with an extra of 700 ml of water or so, and if that evaporates a bit, there's still enough water in there to keep the lake healthier anyway in terms of its water level. So the current proposal is when we first consulted with the community, we were talking about having the weir closer to the lake. At the moment, the idea is to put the weir next to the new bridge that's been recently built. And one thing that may have, again, escaped people's attention is that there will be a fish pass associated with this weir. And that's a big reason why it's not going to be having any negative effects on fish or the water flow, because that fish bypass or the flow bypass will allow a connection between both sides of that weir at all other times other than when we're trying to keep water in the lake during an opening event. So that's, from a bird's eye perspective, a very rough idea of how it might look. This is a slightly prettier picture of how it might look. It is a designer's impression, so it's also not to scale. So the height is distorted. It's not going to be as tall as that in comparison to how tall the banks are. But I guess that just gives a bit of a nicer look of how, because it'll be there'll be riparian vegetation on either side, which will help it sort of blend into the landscape. And then here you've just got the weirs, the inserts that get taken out. So you've got your winter weir inserts are not in, and then you've got summer operation where the weir inserts are in. And just to present something that's not as distorted in terms of its scale. So imagine you're on the landing bridge looking upstream. So that's the full height of the banks. The weir will be shorter than those banks, and that's the kind of thing that you might be expecting to see. So when I gave this presentation to the Whakakī Lake Trust in June, the lake level was 11.08, so that grey line is what the water level would have been. So if you're looking at the weir structure in winter when the lake level was quite low, all you'd be able to see is the tops of those vertical supports. You wouldn't be able to see any other part of the weir. And if you went down and had a look in summer, and in this scenario, we're imagining it's summer and the lake level's at 11.7, so that's that blue dotted line here. The weir inserts would be in, but again, you wouldn't be able to see any of that structure because it would be underwater. And the time when the fish pass is most important is when that lake level or channel level drops down below the top of those inserts, and then this would start to form a barrier in the main channel, but having that fish pass means that there's no barrier because they can just easily skirt around it. And here's that fish pass now. So that fish pass would cover all water levels all the way down to the base of the weir. And you can see that, or hopefully you can see that the overall scale of the weir is, it's not a big dam that people might envisage when we say weir. And the fish pass would cover the fish passage requirements and also the water flow. And so just one more way of having a look at it. So the lake level here would have been maybe 11.9 or 12. So things are starting to get a bit flooded. You would be able to see the fish pass when the situation is like this. But the weir, this dotted white line, is the area that the weir would be, but it would be underwater. You wouldn't be able to see it. So that's the kind of scale of the weir. It's much smaller than the bridge, and often you wouldn't even notice it. Some engineering designs. Again, this is a top-down look. So imagine you're a bird flying over, looking down at the land. These are the kind of the schematics of that new bridge that's just gone in. You can see the fish pass here that would be going around the weir, which is the structure here. So, it doesn't need to be as wide as the bridge, so it's much narrower. And that's the kind of scale of things. But yeah, just to talk about the other thing that tripped people up, I think, was the idea that if you've got a fish pass, then you wouldn't be able to control the water level. There would be a gate in that fish pass, which we lock or put in during an opening event. And so you stop the fish pass passing water through it during an opening event, but you take that gate out at all other times. So this is open at all times except for during an opening event. There were some concerns around the siltation in the Rahui channel, and it's always useful to consider your alternatives. So I'll go through a little bit of a comparison between the original site and the current proposed bridge site. So our assets team go out and do surveys along the Rahui channel every couple of years. So these red lines are where they go out and measure water depth and sediment depth. And this is the sill area here. So there's a lot of cross sections there. and then all the way along the channel they measure things, make sure that it's not silting up. So this diagram is the, I guess you'd say that's the depth of the channel. So here you might recognise, so 11.8 is the opening trigger, that would be at the top of this plot here, 11.5, 11. So the sill is sitting at around this sort of 10.6 level. One thing that has struck our engineers is that the Rahui channel actually seems to be getting deeper over time. So this red line is the most recent survey, showing that it's deeper than the ones before it. One of our engineers, Jose Bayer, is also a little bit worried about this sill eroding over time as well. And he's actually advised that if you don't put some kind of water level control structure in there, you may get a situation where this sill erodes and then you start to have more dramatic opening events. So if we do want the option, if we want to maintain that option of having a gentle opening, the weir is even more essential. And in terms of the channel silting up, so the same kind of numbers over here. So this is looking at the scaring that you get at the bed level, at different bed levels. And the table on the right is the velocity that you need to move different types of sediment. So the Rahui channel's got a lot of silt and clay, so that's the sort of top part of this plot. These are the numbers that you would need to move that material. On this plot over here, that's the summer level weir, and the orange line is the winter level weir, or the current situation, which is no weir. And they're modelled by the same line because it's essentially the same situation. So those spring and summer opening events would be a very gentle opening, so you wouldn't get much scaring during those. And remembering at the moment, it's often the case where the lake doesn't get opened at all. So there's, we're not losing any scaring potential there. We're not losing any flushing benefit there if we're getting a little bit versus none. But in the case of the normal opening during winter, the velocities are getting much higher than they need to be to move the material that's in the Rahui channel. And so we're not expecting that to silt up. And that would also help explain why the Rahui channel is getting deeper over time. It's because the scaring is actually making that channel deeper. And that would continue on with a weir in that winter configuration. So then we've got the original site, which was, as I mentioned before, was over here. We're now talking about the bridge site. The landowners here withdrew their consent to have the bridge there, so didn't have that choice anymore. But there's also good reasons to have it at the bridge site. One is that it's easy to get to because of the existing road. You can also use the bridge to remove the weir inserts, so we wouldn't need to build an additional structure to do that. But in terms of the ecological benefits of these sites, one thing that original site would have done is trapped coarse sediment on the inland side of the weir. People will notice that there's sort of a bit of a delta accumulating here. That coarser sediment drops out as soon as it enters the lake. This would have stopped that from occurring to an extent. But it wouldn't have much difference on the fine sediment, and the rest of the lake, the problem is being caused by that fine sediment. It's because it's so fine, it takes a long time to settle out, and that means it stays in suspension. So whether the weir was at the bridge site or the original site wouldn't make any difference to that fine sediment. So in terms of whether Rahui channel silt up, the answer there is no. Quite confident about that. The winter flushing will keep the channel deep. And yeah, I mentioned engineer Jose Bayer is a little bit worried about that sill eroding, so he thinks the weir is important to protect the lake level as it currently is. And in terms of the original site or the bridge site being better, that original site would have stopped some of the coarse sediment getting in. It's hard to know how much, but it would have presumably stopped some, but it wouldn't have affected the fine sediment. And so with that in mind, the flow bypass that's there, that means the water is just flowing to the lake anyway from both, whether it was at the original site or the proposed bridge site. There's not much difference from a fine sediment perspective. And then a big concern we've heard about is the fish passage rather. I mentioned the weir is redundant in winter, so there's no no barrier there at all. In essence, it's just during spring and summer when the inserts are in and the lake level is below those below the height, the top of the weir, that you'd start to get an impediment because of the weir structure itself. But that fish pass bypasses all of that structure, so we're not expecting any kind of fish passage problems because we've got a well-designed fish pass. We've had that reviewed by NIWA, who wrote the guidelines on fish passage. They're happy with it, and we've really got no concerns about the fish, the impact on fish populations from this weir structure. And it's, again, I just want to reiterate, so weir, in this case, it doesn't mean a big dam. It's not going to be one of these, you know, valley dams that, you know, you look at and it's tens of metres high. It's quite a small structure. The gradient in that Rahui channel is very flat. It's very easy to provide fish passage, and that's what's been provided for with the proposal. So there's really no worries about the fish. Yeah, other than during an opening event, I think it's worthwhile reiterating the point that the weir really is ecologically irrelevant. It's not changing anything because of that fish pass, because of that flow pass. It means the connectivity between the east and the west side of the weir is still open, and there's, I don't think people need to be concerned about that. So it won't harm fish or tuna. The fish movement will not be hindered for most of the time. The only time that they wouldn't be able to freely move past that weir is during an opening event when the water's racing down the channel anyway, and it would probably be quite hard to swim. At all other times that bypass is open, and the structure itself will also provide a lot of habitat, like the tuna-like structure, and so rocks and things like that they quite like to use as shelter. So I think the structure might end up being quite a good place to set a hinaki net. There'll be lots of hidey holes. The fish movement will be concentrated through that pass. So if I was to go down there and set a net, that's where I would do it. And the hydrological connectivity, another one of these big misunderstandings, I think. So the original proposal had 4 holes in it for the purpose of providing fish passage and flow. The engineers actually decided against those holes because of the structural integrity potentially getting compromised. So opted for a flow bypass channel instead. In either case, they would have been shut off during an opening event, but otherwise they would have been open, and there's just nowhere else the water can go. So when water flows down from the Whakakī, it can't go out to sea because the park is blocked. There's no way for the water to get out there. There's a big sand and gravel plug stopping the water going that way. It can't disappear, so the water's got to go somewhere, and it goes into the lake. And that will happen with or without the weir. So yeah, don't really understand the alternative. What was envisaged there from a particular reviewer. So yeah, just to conclude, the Whakakī, we need something to solve the spring flooding issue, and there's to be an option that doesn't damage the lake and ideally doesn't damage the community by allowing that flooding to persist. Two-stage weir is the best option that we could come up with. I don't think there are any ecological risks. In fact, I think keeping the water in the lake is a massive ecological benefit. You know, stopping the lake from shrinking down to a really small puddle that's full of algae, and also ensuring those water tables stay high enough to support the surrounding wetlands. That's a massive ecological benefit. And yeah, from a reduced flooding perspective, that's a massive community benefit. So the benefits really are very huge. The new site has the additional benefits that I mentioned. So building it near the bridge will make access easier and make it easier to get the inserts in and out. Won't need any extra structure there to do that. But the worst part of any kind of construction is it's always a bit of a mess when you're making it. And then that needs to be healed after the work is finished. So it needs to be revegetated or regrassed. It would have been ideal to do that at the same time that the bridge was being built, because you've got a lot of the same kinds of machinery there. So when we gave this proposal to the Whakakī Lake Trust, that was the idea, trying to encourage both of those things to get done at the same time. unfortunately, that opportunity is past. The bridge is in, so we'll just need to, I guess, incur that additional cost and make that additional mess. But that's life. So that was all I wanted to cover today. So yeah, thanks for listening. I hope that was useful. And nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa.